Have you ever asked yourself why your ticket to wealth depends entirely on the color of the paper in your wallet? Why can a single piece of paper with Benjamin Franklin's face buy a literal mansion in Venezuela, but only a simple dress shirt in the United States? Why do you have to toil for months to buy a phone, while in another place, it costs just a few days of wages? The cruel truth is that money is not created equal. And while you sleep, an invisible force is silently repricing your blood, sweat, and tears every single second. Welcome to the naked truth about money. To understand this injustice, we need to look at the weapon used to commit it. That weapon is in your pocket right now. It is money. Let us conduct a thought experiment to prove it. Imagine you are Bob. Bob lives in the United States. To Bob, a $100 bill represents safety. It is a nice dinner for two at a steakhouse. It is a full tank of gas. It is real value. Now, let us teleport Bob and that exact same piece of paper instantly across the ocean to a bustling street market in Caracas, Venezuela, during the height of the hyperinflation crisis. Suddenly, that single piece of paper with Benjamin Franklin's face is no longer just a dinner. It is a lifeline. It is a fortune. It could buy you enough food to feed a family for a month. It could, in some extreme moments, buy you a literal house in a forgotten neighborhood. The paper has not changed. The ink has not changed. But the power it holds has exploded. Now, let us teleport one more time. We drop Bob into the deepest, most isolated tribe in the Amazon rainforest, a community that has never made contact with the outside world. Bob holds up his $100 bill. He offers it to a hunter in exchange for meat. The hunter looks at him, looks at the paper, and laughs. To him, it is useless. It is too small to start a fire, too soft to use as a weapon, and too tasteless to eat. In that specific context, the most powerful object in the global economy is nothing more than a rectangular piece of trash. This, my friends, is the fundamental paradox. We spend our entire lives chasing money, stressing over it, and ruining relationships for it. Yet, we rarely stop to ask, why does this paper have value? Why does its value change the moment you cross an invisible line on a map? And why, on the screens of traders in London and Tokyo, does that value flicker and dance every single millisecond, deciding who eats and who starves? Welcome to the FinGraphy Ultimate Deep Dive. Today, we are not just talking about exchange rates. We are going to dismantle the engine room of human civilization. We are going to expose why the money in your pocket is not what you think it is. We will take you inside the secret meeting at Camp David where the modern financial world was born by accident. We will walk through the wheelbarrow streets of Zimbabwe to see the nightmare of money dying. And we will finally explain why a single word from a man named Jerome Powell can destroy your savings. Buckle up. This is the story of the illusion we call wealth. To understand why your money fluctuates today, we have to go back to a time when it did not. Imagine living in a village 6,000 years ago. You are a shoemaker. You make excellent sandals. But tonight, you are hungry. You want a chicken for dinner. So, you grab a pair of sandals and walk to the farmer's house. You offer him the shoes, but there is a problem. The farmer is not needing shoes. He already has shoes. He wants a new shovel. Now you are stuck. You have to find a blacksmith who wants shoes, trade your shoes for a shovel, and then take the shovel to the farmer to get your chicken. This is called the double coincidence of wants, and it is an absolute nightmare for running an economy. Humanity needed a solution. We needed a third thing, something that everyone wanted, not because they could eat it or wear it, but because they knew everyone else would accept it. We tried everything. We tried seashells. We tried beads. In Micronesia, they used giant limestone donuts called rye stones that were so heavy they couldn't even be moved. People just remembered who owned which stone. But eventually, the world settled on the heavy hitters, gold and silver. Why gold? Why not iron or copper? Because gold is chemically boring. It does not explode, it does not rust, it does not tarnish. A gold coin buried in the dirt for 1,000 years comes out looking exactly the same as the day it went in. It is scarce enough to be valuable, but not so scarce that you can't find it. It is divisible, durable, and let us be honest, it is shiny. We humans like shiny things. For centuries, value was physical. If you had a coin, it was worth the weight of the metal in your hand. But carrying around bags of heavy metal is dangerous and inconvenient. It makes you a target for bandits. So, ingenious bankers in places like London and Florence came up with an idea. They said, bring your gold to our heavily guarded vault. We will keep it safe. And in return, we will give you a piece of paper, a receipt. This receipt says, whoever holds this paper can come back and claim 1 ounce of gold. Suddenly, trade exploded. It was much easier to carry a stack of paper receipts than a chest of gold. People started trading the receipts themselves, never bothering to go back to the bank to get the metal. This was the birth of paper money. But here is the crucial part. The paper was just a claim check. It wasn't the value itself. The value was still the metal in the vault. This system evolved into the gold standard. It was a beautiful, rigid system. In 1717, Sir Isaac Newton, yes, the gravity guy, who was also the master of the Royal Mint, effectively fixed the price of gold in England, setting the stage for a system that would rule the world for 2 centuries. Under the gold standard, the government could not just print money to pay for its mistakes. If the United States government wanted to print $1 million, they had to go out and dig up or buy $1 million worth of gold to put in their vault. This created incredible stability. Inflation was almost non-existent over long periods. A suit of clothes cost roughly the same amount of gold in 1800 as it did in 1900. Exchange rates were fixed. If 1 ounce of gold was worth $20 and 4 British pounds, then the exchange rate was fixed at $5 to 1 pound. Simple, predictable, safe, but stability comes at a cost. The gold standard was a straitjacket. It meant that in times of crisis, like a war or a depression, the government could not stimulate the economy. They could not print money to build tanks or feed the unemployed unless they found more gold. And in the 20th century, the world was about to face crises that would shatter these golden handcuffs forever. Fast forward to the mid-20th century. World War II has ended. Europe is in ruins. Japan is destroyed. The only major economy left standing strong is the United States. And, critically, the United States holds 2/3 of all the gold in the world. So, in 1944, the world leaders gathered at a hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and agreed on a new system. They said, okay, the whole world will peg their currencies to the US dollar, and the US dollar will be pegged to gold at $35 an ounce. The dollar became as good as gold. This worked fantastic for a while. It created the stability needed to rebuild the world. But by the 1960s, cracks were showing. The United States was spending money like a drunken sailor. They were fighting the massive Vietnam War. They were building the Great Society's social programs at home. They were printing more paper dollars than they had gold in Fort Knox to back them up. Smart observers started to do the math. They realized there were too many paper dollars floating around the world and not enough gold in America. The French, led by President Charles de Gaulle, were the first to act. They basically said, America, we do not trust your paper anymore. We want the metal. France began sending ships loaded with paper dollars to New York and demanding physical gold bars in return. Other countries followed. The US gold reserves began to bleed dry. It was a run on the bank on a global scale. Enter President Richard Nixon. It is August 1971. He is at Camp David with his top economic advisors in a secret, high-stakes weekend meeting. The atmosphere is tense. They have 2 choices. Choice A is to slash government spending, stop the war, and induce a massive recession to save the gold standard. Choice B is to change the rules of the game entirely. Nixon chose choice B. On the evening of Sunday, August 15th, 1971, Nixon interrupted the popular television show Bonanza to address the nation. In a speech that sounded boring but was actually revolutionary, he announced that the United States would temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. That word temporarily was the lie of the century. The window never opened again. In that instant, the anchor was cut. For the first time in human history, the entire world was operating on money that was backed by absolutely nothing. No gold, no silver, no land. This is the birth of fiat money. Fiat is Latin for let it be done. It means the money has value simply because the government says it does and because we, the people, agree to believe it. This brings us back to Bob and his confusion. Why does the value of money change every second? Because today, money is not a rock. It is a share of stock in a country. When you hold a US dollar, you are betting on the economic strength, the military power, and the political stability of the United States of America. When you hold a euro, you are betting on the European Union. The foreign exchange market, or Forex, was born from this chaos. It is a 24-hour, $7.5 trillion a day auction house where the entire world votes,
new bidder in the Senate,
second by second,
looking
on
for
which
5-5.
country they trust
Do I hear
the most.
5,500?
If a country announces a new technology, their currency goes up. If a country elects a crazy leader, their currency goes down. It is the ultimate popularity contest, with your life savings at stake. So, if money is now just a floating concept based on trust, how is the price actually set? It comes down to the oldest law in economics: supply and demand. Imagine the Forex market as a gigantic, loud, chaotic auction house. But instead of auctioning off paintings or antique furniture, they are auctioning off entire economies. On one side, you have the supply. This is the amount of currency a country pumps into the world. If the United States government decides to print $3 trillion to fight a pandemic, they have massively increased the supply. Basic logic tells us that if you have more of something, it becomes less valuable. This is why printing money usually weakens a currency. On the other side, you have demand. This is where it gets interesting. Who wants to buy dollars or yen or dong? There are three types
analyzing the
of
distinct
buyers
behaviors
in
of the
this
tourist,
auction house.
suit, and shark segment,
First,
we can
the
optimize our
tourists
strategy
and
for maximum
consumers.
financial growth.
This is Bob. He needs euros to buy a bratwurst in Berlin. This creates a tiny bit of demand. Second, the corporations. This is Apple, Toyota, Samsung. Apple needs Chinese yuan to pay the factory workers in Shenzhen to assemble your iPhone. They sell billions of dollars to buy billions of yuan. This creates a significant amount of demand. But the third group is the whale. The speculators and investors. These are the hedge funds, the central banks, the pension funds. They move trillions of dollars around the world not to buy products, but to hunt for profit. They are like sharks smelling blood in the water. These investors are looking for two things: yield and safety. Yield means interest. If a bank in America pays 5% interest on a deposit, and a bank in Japan pays 0%, where are you going to put your money? You move it to America. To do that, you have to sell your yen and buy dollars. This massive wave of money moving into the US drives the value of the dollar up. Safety is the other factor. When the world gets scary, when wars break out or pandemics hit, investors panic. They sell risky currencies from unstable countries and buy the safe havens. Usually, this is the US dollar, the Swiss franc, or the Japanese yen. It is the financial equivalent of running to a bomb shelter. So, the value of your currency is essentially a real-time report card of how attractive your country is to these global sharks. If they like your interest rates, your stability, and your economic growth, they buy your currency and your money gets stronger. If they think you are messy, corrupt, or printing too much money, they sell, and your money becomes worthless. And speaking of worthless money, we must now look at what happens when this system goes completely, horribly wrong. We have to talk about the nightmare scenario. We have to talk about Zimbabwe. Inflation is a term that economists use calmly, but for regular people, it is a thief that comes in the night. It steals the value of your labor, it steals your retirement, it steals your future. To understand inflation, imagine an economy is a giant pizza. The pizza represents all the goods and services produced. The cars, the haircuts, the apples, the houses. The money supply represents the number of slices that pizza is cut into. If you cut the pizza into 4 slices, each slice is huge and valuable. If you cut the same pizza into 1,000,000 slices, each slice is microscopic crumbs. You have more slices, but you have the same amount of pizza. This is exactly what happened in Zimbabwe in the 2000s. But to understand why, we have to look beyond just printing money. Hyperinflation is almost always a political event before it is an economic one. In the 1980s, Zimbabwe was the breadbasket of Africa. The Zimbabwean dollar was actually worth more than the US dollar. One Zimbabwe dollar bought you $1.35 US. It was a proud, strong currency. But the government, led by Robert Mugabe, made a series of political decisions that destroyed the country's production. They seized productive farmland, often giving it to people who did not know how to farm. Suddenly, the production of the country collapsed. The pizza shrank dramatically, there was less food, fewer goods to buy.
Critical
At the same
solvency
time,
alert.
The government was broke. They
Balance
had
is null.
debts to pay, soldiers to feed,
Debt
and
overflow.
cronies to bribe. Since they couldn't collect taxes from a collapsing economy, they did the only thing they could. They turned on the printing presses. They printed money to pay for everything. But remember, there were fewer goods to buy. So you had more and more money chasing fewer and fewer goods. Prices started to rise. A loaf of bread that cost $1 yesterday cost $2 today. The government panicked. Instead of stopping, they printed more money to help people pay the higher prices. They printed notes with bigger and bigger numbers. $1,000, $1 million, $1 billion. It reached a point of insanity. In November 2008, the inflation rate in Zimbabwe was estimated at 79 billion% per month. Prices were doubling every 24 hours. Imagine walking into a shop to buy a bottle of water. The price is $1 billion. You reach into your bag to get the cash. By the time you pull the cash out and hand it to the cashier, the price has gone up to $1.5 billion. You are literally poorer standing in line than you were when you walked in the door. People stopped using wallets. They used wheelbarrows to carry cash just to buy basics. Teachers, doctors, and engineers saw their entire life savings turn into dust. A pension that was supposed to support a family for 20 years couldn't buy a single egg. Eventually, the government printed the $100 trillion note, a piece of paper with a 1 followed by 14 zeros. It was the largest denomination of currency ever issued. And do you know what it was worth? About 40 US cents. It was cheaper to use the money as toilet paper than to buy actual toilet paper with it. The trust was completely broken. The currency died. Zimbabweans simply stopped using it. They switched to US dollars, South African rand, or just bartering goods. This is the ultimate fate of any fiat currency that is abused. The value of money is not magic, it is trust. And once that trust is shattered, no amount of ink can bring it back. If inflation is the fire that burns down an economy, interest rates are the water hose used to put it out. And the man holding the hose is the chairman of the central bank. In the US, that is the Federal Reserve, or the Fed. You might have seen memes of Jerome Powell, the current chair of the Fed, but make no mistake, he is arguably the most powerful man in the global economy, perhaps even more powerful than the US president when it comes to your wallet. So, how does this magic lever work? Interest is the price of money. If you want to borrow money, you pay interest. If you lend money by putting it in a savings account or buying a bond, you earn interest. When inflation gets too hot, like it did recently in the US, the Fed raises interest rates. This makes borrowing expensive. It becomes harder to buy a house, harder to use a credit card, harder for businesses to expand. This cools down the economy, people spend less, demand drops, and prices stop rising. But here is how it affects the currency value. Remember the global auction house we talked about? Global investors are obsessed with yield, the return on their money. When the US Fed raises interest rates, say from 0% to 5%, suddenly holding US dollars becomes very profitable. You can buy a US government bond and get a guaranteed 5% return risk-free. Investors in Europe, Japan, or Brazil look at that 5% yield in America and they look at their own 0% yield at home and they make a rational decision. They sell their euros, they sell their yen, and they buy US dollars to purchase those American bonds. This creates a massive tidal wave of demand for the dollar. Billions upon billions of dollars flow across the ocean, sucked into the American financial system like a vacuum. This demand pushes the value of the dollar up and crushes the value of other currencies. This is exactly what happened in 2022 and 2023. The Fed raised rates aggressively to fight inflation. As a result, the US dollar became a wrecking ball, smashing other currencies to historic lows. It is a reminder that while we like to think of our national currency as a symbol of sovereignty, in the face of the Federal Reserve's interest rate lever, most currencies are just passengers on a boat steered by Jerome Powell. However, interest rates only control what economists call hot money. This is money that moves fast. It clicks a mouse button, buys a bond, and leaves a week later if the rates drop. But there is another kind of money that is much more important for the long-term value of a currency. We call this cold money, or foreign direct investment. This is not money buying a piece of paper. This is money buying concrete, steel, and land. This is when Samsung decides to build a massive smartphone factory in Vietnam. This is when Tesla builds a gigafactory in Shanghai. high. When a foreign company decides to build a factory in another country, they cannot pay the local construction workers in US dollars. They cannot pay for the local cement and electricity in euros. They have to convert their billions of dollars of capital into the local currency. If Samsung invests $10 billion into Vietnam, that is $10 billion worth of demand for the Vietnamese dong. This creates a sustained, long-term upward pressure on the currency's value. But here is the secret. Foreign companies do not build billion-dollar factories in countries that are chaotic. Capital is cowardly. It hates uncertainty, it hates riots, it hates revolutions. And it absolutely hates governments that change the rules every Tuesday. This is why political stability is actually a currency fundamental. Look at China in the 1990s and 2000s. Regardless of what you think of their politics, they offered incredible stability. The foreign investor knew that the factory they built today would still be there in 10 years, and the tax laws would likely remain favorable. This stability acted as a magnet for the world's capital. It turned China into the factory of the world, and it created a structural demand for the Chinese yuan that lasted for decades. Conversely, look at countries with constant political turmoil. If a country has a coup d'etat every 5 years, or if they have a history of suddenly seizing foreign assets, investors stay away. They demand a risk premium. This means the currency of that unstable country trades at a discount. It is the market's way of saying, we do not trust you to be here tomorrow. Now, we arrive at one of the most requested and controversial topics in the history of finance. The reason why the US dollar reigns supreme, even when the American economy is printing money like there is no tomorrow. We need to talk about the petrodollar. To understand this, we have to travel back to a very specific meeting. It is February 14th, 1945. World War II is drawing to a close. President Franklin D. Roosevelt is on a US Navy cruiser, the USS Quincy, anchored in the Great Bitter Lake of the Suez Canal. He is meeting with King Abdulaziz, the founder of modern Saudi Arabia. The deal they struck that day, and refined in the 1970s under Nixon, changed the world. The agreement was simple, but geopolitical genius. The United States guaranteed the military security of the House of Saud. In exchange, Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil producer, agreed to price and sell its oil exclusively in United States dollars. This might sound like a technicality, but it was a masterstroke. Think about it. Every single country on Earth needs oil to run their cars, to fly their planes, to power their factories. If you are France, Japan, or Brazil, you cannot just buy oil with your own currency. Saudi Arabia won't take it. You first have to go out into the foreign exchange market and buy US dollars. Only then can you buy the oil. This created a permanent, artificial, and massive global demand for the US dollar. It meant that even if the US economy was weak, nations still had to hoard dollars just to keep their lights on. This system allowed the United States to run massive deficits, to import more than it exported, and to live beyond its means for decades, because there was always a hungry global market waiting to soak up those dollars. However, this dominance is not just about oil. It is about the balance of trade. Generally speaking, if a country exports more than it imports, its currency tends to be strong. Look at Germany or Japan in their prime. When you buy a German BMW, you might pay in dollars at your local dealership. But ultimately, BMW Munich needs euros to pay its engineers and buy steel. So, your dollars are sold to buy euros. This demand drives the euro up. But wait, if a strong currency is a sign of a strong economy, why do some powerful countries fight tooth and nail to keep their currency weak? This leads us to the dark art of currency wars. You might assume that every prime minister and president wants their currency to be strong. A strong currency sounds like a national scorecard. It means your citizens are rich. It means they can travel to Paris or Tokyo and feel like kings, buying cheap dinners and souvenirs. It means imported iPhones and fine wines are cheaper. But there is a trap. A strong currency is great for consumers, but it is a death sentence for producers. Let us look at China. For the last 30 years, China's entire economic model has been based on manufacturing cheap goods and selling them to the world. Their advantage was price. A plastic toy made in Shenzhen was cheaper than a plastic toy made in Ohio. But let us do the math. Imagine the exchange rate is 6 Chinese yuan to 1 US dollar. An American buyer has $1. He can buy a widget that costs 6 yuan. Now, imagine the Chinese economy booms, and the yuan gets super strong. Now, 1 US dollar only buys 3 yuan. That same 6 yuan widget now effectively costs the American buyer $2. The price has doubled just because the currency got stronger. The American buyer looks at the price tag and says, forget it. I will go buy my widgets from Vietnam, Bangladesh, or India, where the currency is still cheap. Suddenly, Chinese factories close. Workers lose their jobs. The economy slows down. This is the exporter's nightmare. This is why China has been accused for years of currency manipulation. They would intentionally print more money or buy up foreign assets to keep the supply of yuan high and the value low. They were fighting to keep their money cheap so their factories could stay open. This phenomenon is called a currency war, or a race to the bottom. It is a bizarre contest where nations compete to see who can devalue their currency the fastest to steal export market share from their neighbors. It is a beggar thy neighbor policy that turns the logic of wealth upside down. But there is an even more dangerous trap than a strong currency. It is the trap of having no control over your currency at all. We have to talk about the euro. The euro was a beautiful dream. A united Europe, trading freely with a single currency, rivaling the US dollar. No more exchanging money when you drive from Paris to Berlin. Efficiency, unity, strength. But the creators of the euro ignored a fundamental rule of economics. You cannot have a single currency for different economies unless you also have a single government. Germany is an industrial powerhouse, an export machine. Greece is a tourism-based economy with a history of government spending. In the old days, if Greece got into debt or its economy slowed down, it had a magic button. It could devalue its currency, the drachma. This would make a Greek vacation super cheap for Germans and Americans. Tourists would flock in, bringing money, and the economy would recover. It was an automatic safety valve. But when Greece joined the euro, they threw away that button. They handed the steering wheel of their economy to the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. When the financial crisis hit in 2009, Greece was drowning in debt, but they could not devalue. They were stuck with the euro, which was valued based on the strength of Germany, not the weakness of Greece. It was like putting a toddler in a heavyweight boxing match. The currency was too strong for their economy to handle. Their exports were too expensive. Their hotels were too expensive. They couldn't print money to pay their debts. They were handcuffed to the Titanic. This structural flaw nearly destroyed the European Union and serves as a stark warning to the world. A currency is not just money. It is a sovereign tool of adjustment. Give it up, and you give up your ability to save yourself. We have traveled from the stone tablets of ancient markets to the gold vaults of empires, through the betrayal of the Nixon shock and into the chaotic digital casino of the modern Forex market. So, why does money have different values? It is because money is no longer a thing. It is a report card. It is a real-time, ticking, flashing report card on the health of a nation. It measures the discipline of its government, the productivity of its workers, the stability of its laws, and the hunger of its investors. It is a system where a $20 bill can be a fortune or trash, depending entirely on the invisible web of trust that holds the world together. But the story is not over. We are standing on the edge of a new cliff. The era of fiat money, which began only in 1971, is a tiny blip in human history. It is an experiment. And many believe the experiment is failing. Inflation is eroding the trust that holds the system together. The weaponization of the US dollar through sanctions is making countries like China and Russia look for alternatives. The Petrodollar agreement is being challenged as Saudi Arabia considers selling oil in yuan. And rising from the ashes of the 2008 financial crisis is a new challenger: cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, money that requires no trust in a government, no faith in a central banker, and no permission to use. Is it the digital gold that will replace the dollar? Or is it just one speculative bubble in the great global casino? We will answer that question in our next deep dive. This has been a FinGraphy original. If you now look at the money in your wallet and see it not as value, but as a story we all agree to believe, then we have done our job. If you want us to dismantle the Bitcoin versus petrodollar war in the next episode, leave a comment below with the word future. And do not forget to like this video. In the economy of YouTube algorithms, your like is the strongest currency of all. Thank you.